feedback session today. So, on episode 294, we're going to be looking at images that Gunilla and Janet sent in. How could we fix it? What were their problems? How could we make the images better? So, if you happen to be watching live, then leave a comment. Let me know you're here, and we can make a start. Yeah, so welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 294. Yeah, sort of all the stuff that happens just before you actually tune in kind of leads to a point whereby I start and I go live, and then suddenly it's right, okay, I'm here. So apologies for that. So where are we? Yes, so this is episode 294. So today is a feedback session. Today we're going to be looking at the idea of people have sent me images. How might they have been improved? If you happen to be watching live, then leave a comment. Let me know you're here. You can always click the like button as well. That always helps. And Lisa says hello from a very warm and sunny Maryland. Welcome, Lisa. And John joins us and says hello all and happy Father's Day, Kim and others. Roland joins us from a Scorchio, London. Hot down in London then. Yeah, so today here in Castle Douglas, it's warm. It does feel like a nice summer's day, like the first real summer's day. We had some really nice spring days, and then it's been a bit for the last couple of weeks. Robert joins us, also says happy Father's Day. It's sunny and warming up here in Frisco, Texas. Ganilla's here in the car. I hope you're not going to get too hot in the car. Yes, of course it's Father's Day as well. Happy Father's Day to anybody who wants to celebrate that. And of course it's the summer solstice, longest day in the northern hemisphere, shortest day in the southern hemisphere. What else? Sandy joins us from a very rainy day in Alberta. Robert says also happy first day of summer. Is it the first day of summer on the summer solstice? I'm never entirely sure quite how that works, because officially, Midsummer's Day is in fact I think the 24th. Well, anyway, we are kind of blethering and what have you. So let's start having a little think about this. So what are we doing? Feedback session. Yes. So today is a feedback session. This is your chance to get genuine feedback on your own images. There's not many places where you can get this for free, but done by a professional photographer, so it's always worth doing. Janet joins us from a mild Mississauga. I was out to shoot the earliest sunrise of the year. Oh, congratulations. I think I always kind of have a bit of an intention to it, and then the idea of actually being up at 4 o'clock in the morning or earlier just never quite seem to get round to it. Never quite so good for the early mornings myself. Better off sort of shooting the latest sunrise of the year, sunset of the year, I think, or maybe the latest sunrise too. I am definitely waffling. What are we talking about? Let's go back to this notion of feedback session. Yes, so feedback session today. So what we're going to do is first of all, let me tidy up the desktop a little bit here so I can actually see what's going on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with Gunilla in Orland, and she has sent in not that one, yay, here we go. So actually, for those of you who remember last week, or who tuned in last week, we were looking at the notion of intentional camera movement. And so intentional camera movement is a point whereby it's not an accidental wobble, or I didn't mean to get that blurred. It's where you are intentionally moving the camera at the point you go click and creating an intentional blurring effect. So we talked all about that last week in episode 293. And I then set a challenge for next week, which is episode 295. And so Ganilla's been out there experimenting, and she came up with this image. And then she says to me, I've taken some intentional camera movement photos and sent you in both the post process. This is the edited version, and the raw file. It's a forest with mostly fir trees. It seems as if I move the camera in a small half circle and up and down. Now, she says it seems as if that makes me wonder whether it wasn't fully intentional. Because it is one of those problems that when you try and move the camera up and down, you don't always get it straight, especially if you're going to click and flicking it. Sometimes the wrist can move a bit. We'll come on to that. I wonder if the light pattern of the sky is too bright, and if it would have been better if it were just straight up and down and not that crooked pattern. I have cropped the picture, left out the lower part with the ground. Maybe I should have left out the upper part with the sky instead. Susan mentioned in the last podcast that the sky can be a problem when taking intentional camera movements of trees. I can see that it's not easy to get a piece. I can see that, but it's not easy to not get a piece of the sky in the shot. I have to practice more. Now, just to give you a little kind of sense of where she was at here, her camera settings were, she had an ISO 100, an f8 and 1/15 of a second. Okay, so 1/15 of a second is enough that if you kind of flick your wrist, you're going to get this blurred movement. So let's just open this up in, where are we? Okay, that wasn't quite what I meant to do. Let's click here and then, once again, I need to, a slightly untidy desktop there. Let's just drag. So this is Gunilla's original raw photo, which if we compare to the, we can see that she's brightened it up and she's cropped it a bit. So let's just hit auto on that. As you can see, it brightens it up with the auto. And we'll just run with that for the moment, just so we've got the image and we know what we're looking at. So what's happened then is, so it's a pine forest. We can, as well as the trees, the trunks of the trees, we can see down here we've got probably ferns or moss, maybe even slightly smaller sort of seedlings or something planting themselves. As the trunks, the good thing about pine trees, if you're doing this, generally speaking, with an intentional camera movement, is they tend to be pretty straight trunks. So an up-down movement tends to make sense. But through the gaps, what we find is you've got the little patches of sky. And those little patches of sky actually end up becoming disproportionately dominant in the image. Now, if we again look at Gunilla's one here, what she's done, she's kept in most of that sky and cropped off the bottom. But another option of what she might have done, if we take that crop, is if she'd actually cropped out maybe more of the top. What would have happened then? Well, then you end up with something. Let's try again. There we go. Maybe something like this. And I think there's something quite kind of interesting with this in actually keeping this sort of the little green stuff happening at the bottom, the undergrowth there. I mean, you can take, if you wanted to get rid of all the sky bits, you would have to do something like that, perhaps. But then maybe by the time we get to that point, I think part of the problem here is what is there to really grab our interest? And the problem is with those streaks of sky is that they are very, very dominant. So why does that happen? Okay, let's take a little detour for just for a moment. No, hold on. Where am I trying to do? I want to get rid of that. That's right. There we go. So what I want to do, when Gunilla sent me this image, I thought, well, okay, let's just grab my camera, went out into the garden, and thought, well, okay, let's see what happens here. So this was just yesterday, a little bit of sunshine. There's a bunch of trees at the bottom of the garden. Now I don't have the straight trunks that Gunilla's got with the pine trees, but I thought let's just sort of see what happens. There's sort of trunk going up here, slight curves, tiny little bit of kind of sky you can just about sort of see in the background here. This is completely unedited, by the way, and it's the JPEG version. It's not the raw file. So obviously if I was to edit it properly, I would pull down the highlights, but it doesn't matter because for this is what I wanted. We've got a couple of, these are beech trees, a couple of brighter patches of light. Now, the question is what happens when I try and move it? Now, if I, where are we? I want to go details. I just want to check the, the details pane here, just to try and let you know what it was I had. So, This one is just straightforwardly 125th of a second, f6.3, something like that. Now, I then move my wrist. I go click like that. And what happens here is actually I haven't gone straight up. I've sort of kind of gone at a slight angle. And we can see here how it streams. And it's not even a straight angle. It's not even intentional. It's a wobbly, you know. It's not a straight line in that. So this one here is, where are we? This is a 1/6 of a second. Okay. So as a 1/6 of a second, I wasn't able to actually create an exactly straight line in a 1/6 of a second. But also look how much, and this is the key bit here, look how much all these little bits of sky and reflected leaves really absolutely dominate. And this is one of the things to remember, especially if you're thinking about doing entering an image for the intentional camera movement challenge for next week, is that the light patches create a really disproportional amount of attention grabbing, especially if there's a kind of dark background. If you wanted the dark patches to really grab the attention, you would have to have a massively light background so that the dark then stood out against the light. If you think about the idea of, if you think of it like a large black screen with a little blob of white on it, you immediately get drawn to the blob of white. But likewise, if you have a large white screen and a little blob of black on it, you will immediately get drawn to the black. We get drawn to the place where there's the kind of most contrast. And in a tree scene, generally speaking, those little bits of light are the biggest, where the biggest amount of contrast is. So here, it's not dominating so much. Here, it's really dominating. Try it again. Okay, and now I kind of did a flick. Only now I'm trying to get straighter, having realised the last one's gone. Only now I've sort of slightly overcompensated, and I'm leaning off to the right a little bit. And you can see, in fact, actually, I think the way that curves there, that might have been one where I was flicking down, because I tried both flicking up and flicking down as well. So that's another thing to go, if you're wanting to try and avoid the sky, which I think is rather what I was trying to do in this one, actually take your picture at the upper part of where you want it to be and then flick it down. Whereas, as opposed to pointing it at the ground and then flicking it up, because if you flick it up, you're never entirely sure whether you're going to miss the sky bit. And what's happened here is, as I've gone click, there's all these different bits of the hand, the wrist and everything else jerking at the same time. And the biggest jerk part of this is right at the beginning of this. And this bit here, I suspect, is probably these leaves where the light is just, you know, it's, and those leaves, and then I'm getting, you know, so it's getting dragged. Oh no, well, whichever way around I've done it, but it is getting dragged and it's smearing and it's not working. So the next, I mean, this is one there you just grab circles and start going, or you know, trying to drag it around. And you can see just how dominating these all become. Now, I'm not saying that these are, I don't overly like these pictures. What I'm doing though is I've put them up here to demonstrate what happens. These are all again 1/6 of a second. So what I did here with this one was, I then started trying to move and click at the same time. Okay, so I start it moving before I go click. And that's one of the ways you can sometimes, because if the actual act of going click as you're moving, click and moving at the same time, is you've got, as well as moving the camera up and down, you're pressing the camera. And that's kind of pushing an extra weight. So it makes it that little bit more complicated. Whereas if you're already moving and you go click, then you kind of maybe got more of a chance of keeping it straight. Even then, there's a sort of slight bend. Or I might do actually. I think that bend is actually just the curvature of the lens, because it's only actually happening at the outside. So, and here's another one where I did a longer version. Streaks. So with this one, it looks like I was moving and went click, and then probably stopped just before the shutter stopped. And actually, because of that, we can actually see a little bit more of the background. And so that becomes part of the idea of, you know, sometimes for some of these kind of shots, it's kind of interesting if you've got I was mentioning last week, the notion of a pause and a click. It's always, or, you know, so, or when you go click, you pause for a fraction and then move. Or you go click as you're moving and then stop and pause for a moment, which is what's happened here. And then that way you're kind of getting a little bit more of a mix of the actual background with the streak that's happening with the intentional camera movement. Comments, what have we got here? Oh, Janet's saying that she usually does do the latest sunrise as well as the earliest. And April says, oh, greetings from a beautifully hot, sunny Long Island, New York, and happy Father's Day. Rona says maybe a fluid head would help, or use of a self-timer. Well, I think the thing is here, Roland, is it's about play. And the notion that, you know, what's going to work for you. I mean, if you've got it on sitting on a tripod with a kind of fairly loose thing, you can go click and then you can move the tripod or left and right or up and down, if you, depending on the settings you've got. Certainly if you've got a ball head, which is very loose, that's going to create the same kind of problems. But if you've got something more fixed where you can do a left or right or up or down, that might give you a little bit more control. But like I say, the main thing here is play. Now, another thing I wanted to point out with this was, again, in the garden, same time, I just turned my back to the trees and we're now looking back into the garden and I saw just this little plant sticking up. And so what I've done is on a normal photo level here, so this is, you know, an f2.8 and 640th of a second. Because it's bright sunshine, f2.8. So I've got that very shallow depth of field here. What happens when I try and streak this? Now the problem is, in order to streak it in the sunlight, I can't stick with the f2.8. I need a slow shutter speed. So I end up having to go to an f22. And when I do the streak, I end up with this, where actually the flower itself has got lost, and what's happened is all the stuff in the background, the house and other parts of the garden have all got in the way and started the streak. So when the normal kind of thing of shallow depth of field in order to isolate a subject doesn't really work when you're trying to do the in-camera, unless you are so dark or you have an ND filter on that you can keep it at a very shallow depth of field. So the point of all this is that it's kind of complicated, or it's not complicated in the idea of the theory of it. The theory of it's very straightforward. You have it on a slow shutter speed, you point it and you go click, or you move and go click as you're moving at the subject. That's a fairly straightforward thing. The tricky bit is getting the wrist movement right, getting the depth of field right, trying to find something interesting to do it with. And also so that you've got to find a topic that translates well when you're moving. And you've got to make sure that the lines, that smear, is adding to and not detracting from it. And so part of the problem is that when we go back to Gunilla's image, is that these little slight curves, which seems to have come from probably sort of a slight jerk as you're taking the photograph, I don't know that they're necessarily adding to it. They dominate so much that what you see, that you're no longer really seeing the streaks of the tree trunks, which is maybe the slightly more interesting bit. What you're seeing is the dominant part of these little curves without really them adding to the story. At least they're not to me. I mean, there does need to kind of be a slight caveat here, which is if you like this and it makes you go, ooh, then that's great. Then, you know, then job done. But for me, it doesn't translate to me as, you know, as the viewer. And also to go back to this picture here, I think there's nothing wrong with including maybe some of the base as well. And I think this, again, because the part of the base is slightly clearer, I think within that 15th of a second, it probably is a case of maybe a quarter of that 15th, whatever that is. It's been paused for a second, and that's allowed you to have an almost, you know, we're starting to see something, and then we get the smear over the top of it, which I quite like the idea of, and you notice a little bit more at the base there. So ultimately then, Gunilla, all I can really say is go back and play a bit more. And if you feel a 15th is just not giving you enough, I mean, just to double check here, your settings were, you were on a 15th of a second at ISO 100, but you were on f8. Now, if you'd taken that to an f11, an f16, an f22, that might have possibly allowed you to get down to, say, a sixth of a second or a quarter of a second. And at that point, with that amount of time, you've got more time to create more blur, or or even keep it held for a fraction of that time and then move it. And I think sometimes if you've got a longer timer, longer amount of time, then it gives you slightly more flexibility to play around with. The time we end up with only something like a 20th of a second is usually in bright sunlight, when we've already gone as lower ISO as we can, and we've already gone as higher f-stop as we can possibly get. So I hope all this makes sense, Gunilla. Basically, I think that if you're doing the intentional camera movement and you're worrying about those little bits of sky, either try not to include the sky, and the best way of doing that is to actually, when you start at the top and flick down rather than start at the bottom and flick up. And also, if you're having problems with the idea that when you click it's automatically moving, then the other thing to do is maybe you start the movement before you go click, and then kind of go click or click. So already have the movement started, and hopefully that will kind of give you, that's the place to go in and play more. That's the place I would say to experiment with. So hope that all makes sense. But thanks very much for sending that in, Gunilla. And it's really good in fact, it's lovely to see you out there working on this particular topic as well. Now, I hope the rest of you are as well, because next week is the intentional camera movement challenge. So if you haven't had a go at doing it already, go out and play. There's a lot, and go and check last week's episode 293. There's a lot in there. And I also did a very detailed breakdown in the menu section. So if you want to go and check the menu section, you can, because you don't want to watch the whole thing. There's lots of different little sections you can leap to. Find the bits that make you go, right, okay, yes, I remember that. I saw that. Let's try that bit out. Okay. You can try this out in anything. You can try, if it's a dull day, great. You can get the slower shutter speed more easily. If it's a bright day, then you want to find places where there's light hitting something, which is going to give you an interesting streak. You go for evening. If you've got, again, beautiful colours in the clouds or in the sky at sunset, that's a great place to play around with. So if you've got trees, if you've got lampposts, you've got street scenes, there's all sorts of possibilities, lots to play with. And the real thing about this is to experiment, to play, to go out and have fun and see if you can get something that makes you go, ooh. Right, okay, whatever else. Gunilla says, I thought it was a good shot, especially minus the sky. Okay, so for April, if you take the dominant sky out, then yeah, it maybe works better if you're just kind of looking at the streaks on the trunks. And Sandra says, I like the ferns at the bottom. Yeah, I thought they certainly added something to it. Right, okay, so yes, thank you so much for sending that one in. Quick little reminder then that if you want to send your own images into for the podcast, because next week is the intentional camera movement challenge. So if you want to send me images for that to the Kim Ayres podcast at gmail.com. And so that's the place to send your images, but it's also the place for the feedback session. Okay, so if you want to have your own images looked at, you want feedback, you're kind of feeling a bit stuck, you're trying something, it's not maybe working out so well, then next week, the intentional camera movement, the week after will be another feedback session. Okay, so there'll be a feedback session 2 weeks today. So if you want to send in your images, you can get feedback on that. And whether it's anything to do with the intentional camera movement challenge or any other form of photography at all, that's fine. So Kim Ayres podcast at gmail.com. Another quick little reminder is about the Substack newsletter. For anybody who's thinking about joining up to that, I've only got, it's not I'm not prolific with it, maybe one a month, maybe two, it'll be a rare thing that there will be three in a month. So you're not going to get into bombarded email. However, one of the useful things about belonging to the Substack email is a newsletter is that if anything happens to, my account gets hijacked and I lose, or YouTube decides to stop doing the podcast or something like that, I should at least be able to get information out to regular followers. The whole point of doing the Substack thing is that I no longer trust social media to be able to send what I want sent to the people I want sent it to. We were promised all these wonderful things with social media, that we could put out our post and those who follow us would be able to see what we put out. And now they don't show it to hardly a fraction of our followers. So this is me retaking control. But if you definitely want to make sure that you're not missing out on anything, then sign up to the Substack newsletter. And it's free, absolutely free. But of course, if you do want to support these podcasts as well, and you feel like you've got a little bit of cash to splash, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can support this podcast. Another way, of course, is invite your friends along. Let other people know about this podcast as well. Meg's joined us and says, hello, everyone. Welcome, Meg. Glad you could make it. Right. Quick update about the Smug points then as well. So far into June. Basically, where are we? 20. Yeah, up until this week, VG and Gunilla were both on 30 Smug points each, and everybody else was on 5 or 0. Well, that doesn't quite seem right. I think I've forgotten to update that one. Right, I think basically VG and Gunilla were on 35 Smug points and everyone else is on 10 or 5, depending on whether you've been commenting or not. Remember, if you comment, you get 5 Smug points. So if you happen to be lurking and you haven't commented yet, leave a comment, let me know you're here, and you get a bonus 5 Smug points just for being here on the live podcast. That will, of course, update this week. And then next week, when we do the challenge, there are all sorts of Smug points up for grabs there. You get 10 Smug points just for actually entering the challenge. You will get 5 Smug points for turning up to the live one, leaving a comment. If you get there will be a viewer's choice, for which there's a bonus 20 Smug points. And then there's my own choices, 30, 20 and 10 for my first, second and third places as well. And usually a smattering of commendeds too for a bonus 5 Smug points. So lots of Smug points to gain and gather up. So make sure you get your images in for the intentional camera movement challenge next week. And whoever wins accumulates the most Smug points for the month gets to choose a topic for next month. So if there's a particular topic that you would really like me to cover, then try and get the most Smug points for it. Or send it to me anyway. Let me know if there's particular topics that anybody would like me to cover that you don't think I've already done. Then get in touch. Or maybe that I've not done for a long time. Let's face it, I've been doing this podcast now for 6 years. So there are certain topics that maybe I covered 5 years ago that maybe most of you who are watching weren't around at that time. So it's time enough to actually sort of revisit the topic. Right, okay. I'm still feeling slightly out of sorts on this, so apologies if I sort of feel slightly scattered, coming across as slightly scattered. Let's move on to then Janet. And so Janet has sent me an image, and well, I really find Janet's image. And Janet says, that one. So Janet says, I've been gradually working through the images from my recent Europe trip. And the attached image is from Bruges in Belgium. I like the shallow depth of field with the cherub looking towards the white building, but feel like there's too much separation between the two. I did try to reposition myself while shooting, but I wasn't able to improve the angle. Okay. So what we have here then is, we can see here that Janet has got her image. There's a cherub, a stone carved cherub on the left. There's what looks like could be some kind of a religious building or something. There's a building with like white, probably a golden statues or something above. And she's wanting those out of focus. We got the gold against the blue, which is quite nice colouring. But because it's out of focus, your head gets drawn towards the cherub. However, there's a lot of distance between the cherub and these gold figures. And so what she's talking about is the idea that she's tried to get the best angle she can, but hasn't managed to be able to improve on it. Now, I don't know what you were there, so I don't know, was there a barrier in the way, or was your ear already up against the wall or something like that? Now, one of the things you can do, depending on the camera you've got, I would just say that sometimes one of the things that's kind of got me out of a couple of things before is, depending on your camera, some have a little pull-out screen, okay, and that can be invaluable for getting into closer areas. So I've done this very recently, in fact, where I was doing floor shots, where I literally had the camera down at floor level at a point where, and at the floor, just tilted up slightly, and there's no way I could have really, where I was, got my head down to the angle that I really wanted it to. But by pulling out this, and I was able to then look down on it, angle that up, and get the camera composed in the way that I wanted to. Now, similarly, if you're up against the wall, maybe you can't get there, but, you know, you can angle this so that, you know, if I put that against the wall, I can even get as close as that, if that's making it, if my hand's not blocking it, and I can use this pull out here to really see what's going on. So that's an option if you happen to have it. Other than that, yeah, it's always tricky. Sometimes you're shooting blind if you really can't kind of get in any closer to it. But maybe that's also as close as you could get. Sometimes that happens too. Now, let's go back to Janet's. I can also see here, you probably won't quite see it but it might be hidden behind my head, but she's tilted it slightly. You know, there's a little telltale little triangle up here where you've tilted it and the background has shown up. But anyway, that aside, Janet has sent me the raw file. So let's pull up Photoshop again and just drag Janet's raw file in here. And what we can see then is, so it's a slightly different color shift to it, and it is also tilted very slightly to the left. So first of all, let's just hit auto, brighten it up. Color, let's go to see what the auto color does. Yeah, that makes it sort of slightly more natural kind of color, because the white balance, the auto white balance is kind of, I'll tell you, actually, just an interesting little aside here. If we go for the as shot, it's got a very kind of yellow shift to it, an overly yellow shift to it. And actually, it's also got an added vibrance there from when I did the auto. So why, but I'm not thinking, now, you're either going to have, why is it going to have the yellow shift? Either because you've already set your white balance, maybe for a different set of lighting circumstances, or you have it on auto. And when you, now, an interesting thing to remember is when you've got it on auto white balance, the camera will kind of look for, if there's a dominant color, it will push it in the other direction. And when you've got blue sky, it will go, oh, it's overly blue. And so we will automatically shift it. So instead of it being naturally blue, it's going to go too much blue, and it will automatically shift it into the yellows. Okay, so something to bear in mind. But anyway, fortunately, because it's in camera raw, we can just go auto that, and it's now kind of bringing it back. And the auto here is what we can also do. It's got like a little pipette down here where we can choose what we consider to be a natural white point. See, if I choose the blue as the white, it makes everything very yellow. Whereas if I choose like part of the grey stone here, you know, it's got sort of slightly purplish. I can find little bits around here. If I look for the white here, that's probably, that we know that's supposed to be a white building. So that's kind of giving us something there. So you can play around a little bit with a little pipette to try and find the color balance you want. Okay, so next thing we do, so we'll go with that for the moment and just open this. And what we will do, and then we'll do the straighten bit, which we'll just line that up with the vertical here. Now, the next bit, the bit that we're really up against here is what Janet was talking about is that there's a big gap, and the fact is it is nice having this cherub, all that wonderful rich texture of the stone carving there. And then because we've got these golden figures in the background out of focus, we've got this whole kind of sort of almost medieval type feel to it. You know, we know this is a historic scene. It's not 21st or 20th century architecture, this. But there is this big gap. Our eye gets drawn here and there's a massive amount of blur there. So what we're really wanting to do is to have that closer. Now, given the fact that Janet wasn't able to get her, you know, I've suggested the idea of how you might use your camera if you've got a pull-out screen. But if you don't have that option, and this is the photo you've got, you're now back from Europe, you can't go and take the photo again. Another option is to physically move this closer. And if we look at it, you see what the advantage we've got with this is we've got this bit of building on the left between the cherub and the sky, which isn't necessarily giving us anything added. So what I could do is I could do something like this. I could copy that and paste it and then move this closer. Now ignore the left side of it, the back of it, and go, well, how close can I move it? Maybe I could take it to about there. And if I take it to about there, something like that, then actually proportionally, this is going to look better. So at that point, what I can do is I can drag the corner in here. And now we've got maybe we've not got the proportions I want. Maybe I could just drag that down a little bit, something like that. Maybe we don't actually need the red door. Not sure with the red door. It's quite a nice little bit of colour, but let's just say for the sake of this, let's just drag this here. So we've still got that kind of, that proportion. Now, obviously we can't then have the photo with this direct line, but the point is what we do now is we mask it. So I click the mask button here, I turn that to black, I then go to here, we've got it on 100%, I bring the brush size down to something manageable, but I don't want it too small because I kind of want a soft blur. And then what I can do is I can just start painting over the top of it. See, we can bring in that golden figure back there. Now, if I go too far, I end up kind of crossing over here because what we're doing is the black area is showing what was underneath. But what we do is we just kind of take it to a point, okay, there's a little bit of black there, and we just try and find a point in this whereby it kind of blends fairly naturally. Something like that. And actually, I think at this point, you're never going to know it's been blended. It still looks perfectly natural. The only other thing at this point here is there's a kind of slightly brighter patch catching a little bit of roof on the right there. So I think what I might do is if I go back to there and we get the patch tool or the spot healing brush, I could just run that over that and take that bit out, something like that. And now I think when we look at this as a composition, I think what we've got is, that wasn't what I meant to do. That's what I meant to do. This is really, I think, the picture that Janet was probably thinking she would have. So the texture of the cherub is now much more dominant. It's proportionally to the rest of it. We've still got the orange figures, but our eye does go to the texture. So now if I essentially copy all that onto a fresh line, so we've got the single, at this point you can then go in and we can play around with a little bit more editing. Perhaps we want to, what might we do? Might kind of, lighten up a little bit, might even add a little bit of vignette, possibly, something like that. Maybe we want to add a little bit of clarity, something like that, potentially. But you can then play around with a little bit more however you want, and you've kind of got the image to edit. But the key point about this is that the purpose of the photo, the narrative, the story of the photo was about the idea of the cherub's face, but with these golden figures out of focus in the background. So the out of focus figures are lending that sense of the historic building and, that kind of almost religious iconography, or have you, going on in the background. But it's a support. It's not the key part of the photo. It's a support to the cherub's face. And in that fact, what I might also do, I think, is possibly just brighten up the cherub's face itself. So if I maybe went to the levels, brought that up. Now I'm just looking at the cherub side of it. I don't want to go too far and blow the highlights, but if I bring that back to about there, that gives us brighter cherub. Then again, I can take that mask, I can refill it in, and then take this and swap this over to the white, and then just lighten up this face a little bit here. We can see here from the histogram over here that this is now just working with that. So I can bring that up to just where it starts to rise up. And now we've got the brighter part of the cherub face. And you can see that that just helps lighten it up a little bit. So fun concept. And that's the way, really way, that's so, I think when you go back to your original photo here, we can see that, you know, yes, you're right. It's a nice idea, but this cherub face is too far away. This chunk of building is acting as a kind of a buffer, which isn't really delivering anything other than to separate out and kind of push these golden figures even further away. But when we bring that in closer, it then helps to kind of bring the elements together in a way that I think was probably what you were after in the first place. So I hope that helps. I hope that all makes sense, Janet. But really interesting photo. Thank you very much for sending that one in. Comments. Janet says, I think there was some kind of barrier. It's been a while to try and remember exactly. Yeah, very often there are things to sort of stop that get in the way. So often we know that the perfect photo would have been if we'd only managed to get 2 feet or further to the left or to the right than where we were. I mean, how many of us have a vast number of stories of the one that got away, you know? And April says, I like the concept of the photo. Yeah, I think it's a good concept. Right. Okay. So thank you then to Janet for sending that image, and also thank you to Gunilla for sending in hers. So that pretty much draws us to the end. A fairly short podcast because we only had the 2 submissions for the feedback session. I would say I really, you know, I try and emphasize this because for me, the feedback, the personal feedback that you can get on your own photos is by far and away one of the best ways to grow as a photographer. Obviously, the best way to grow as a photographer is to go out there and take photos. It's the act of taking photos, looking at your photos, curating your photos, editing your photos, and continually doing that, which ultimately is what improves you. But within that, secondary to that, is the fact that we have our blind spots. We get stuck. There are things that we don't notice about our pictures, or just we haven't had the experience to know how we might get around something that we have noticed. And at that point, being able to get the opinion, the viewpoint of somebody else who knows what they're talking about with a camera is absolutely invaluable. And I talk about this because of my own experiences that I know when I was learning photography. It was when I discovered a particular place that was able to give me feedback that my photography just absolutely jumped up. You know, it was exponentially was my growth in photography. Stuff that I learnt now 15 years ago that had I not had, I might still be struggling to work out today. So I can't kind of emphasize strongly enough. And in an ideal world, I think most of these podcasts will probably be feedback sessions because this is where I think you can really grow. So make the most of it. You know, there's an opportunity here to grow your photography through feedback. So send your images. Like I say, the next one will be in 2 weeks' time. So send me your images, first come, first serve basis, and send them to Kim Ayres, podcast@gmail.com. Dedicated email address I've set up specifically to receive submissions. So next week then is the ICM Intentional Camera Movement Photo Challenge. So this is where you get your chance, and I really hope you've been having a go, and if you haven't had a go out and try again this week. Send me your images. The next week will be the 28th of June. Try and get them to me by Friday the 26th. Saturday morning at the absolute latest. If your only opportunity to take the photo was to go out and do it on the Friday night, I will accept it on the Saturday morning. But try and get out before that. Lots of fun to be had with this one, and there's so many different ways of approaching that intentional camera movement. And like I said, go back, check episode 293 for loads of information and ideas. And the part of this is, yes, try and earn some extra Smug points, but actually that's kind of by the by. The real thing about this is that we've got our community here, and that each of you will interpret the brief in a different way. And it's so we'll go out and we'll do our own thing. And then when we see what everybody else has done, that then inspires us as well. So put your image in, because your image may well inspire somebody else to have a go at something like it, or try something out that you've tried, and as well as you having a chance to try out what somebody else has done. So lots of fun to be had. So intentional camera movement challenge for next week. Right, and like I say, if you enjoy these podcasts, would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. Right, with all that, you have a couple of people saying thanks and goodbye and have a good week and all the rest of it. So I look forward to seeing you all next week, and for the intentional camera movement challenge. See, I can't wait to see what you're going to stick in for it. Take care. Bye-bye. Oh, not that one. Let's try this one.